we built the ark out of gopher wood. The flood it came and the ark it stood. And those arks are moving and moving and moving. And those arks are moving and moving along. Who built the ark? Now who built the ark? Oh Lord, my Lord. And those arks are moving and moving and moving. And those arks are moving and moving along. March the animals 2 by 2, the hippopotamus and the kangaroo. And those arks are moving and moving and moving. Those arks are moving and moving along. Who built the ark? Now who built the ark? Oh Lord, my Lord. And those arks are moving and moving and moving. Those arks are moving and moving along.
I'm Bob Crawford.
And I'm Chris Breslin.
And this is RTN Theology 28B. 28B, you say?
Because there's no rules. We can do a 2-part. We can do A and B.
Yeah. And our host, Liz Weiss, had a very extensive and deep conversation with her guest, Micah Bournes, that part 2, 28B, is definitely required here.
Some drunk poet was singing of God and his mercies, quietly sipping his gin, painting a picture of words from a portrait of Jesus becoming again. And oh, sing, oh Lord, oh grace, and oh, sing, oh Lord, oh grace.
Never dismiss the visions of madmen. Wisdom can be gathered from anyone who sees what others cannot. Drunk men tell no tales. Poets cannot lie. Poets cannot lie because we do not divide fact from fiction. There's often more truth in our fantasy worlds and metaphors than human courts where liars swear to speak honestly in the name of laws they break, in the name of gods they disobey. The prayers of the proud will never reach heaven, but God hears the slurred words of the stumbling prophets, and all will be cursed who mock them. It is not an easy task to plead with the world, to grieve for the world, especially since God often speaks through those most broken. The picture we paint in our minds is a far cry from the reality of heaven. When the saints go marching in, it will not be a parade of the almost perfect. God does not reserve grace for those who only need a little bit. The healthy are in no need of a doctor. The healer is for the sick. Heaven will be a freak show. Promiscuous young men will embrace the virgin priests who molested them, and their hearts will both be pure. How amazing is grace. The street corner preacher will be greeted by thousands of people she thought were not listening. Thank you for enduring the times we mocked you. Your sidewalk sermons are why we know God. How amazing is grace. Aborted children will tug the spotless robes of young women and say, "Hello, mother. I'm so glad to finally meet you." The former master will see the lashed back of his no longer slave and say, "You taught me the love of the Savior." The suicide bomber who prayed for forgiveness during the millisecond between pressing the detonator and standing before the throne of God. The guilty thief hanging next to Jesus on the cross. The madman who spoke to invisible beings will stand between Michael and Gabriel with a grin as wide as an angel's wingspan and say, "I knew I wasn't crazy." The missus and the mistress, the victim and the rapist, the foreign and the racist, the bullies and the geeks. All those who somewhere along the way believed, whose sins were forgiven and strength was given to love their enemies. So so many we swore there is no way in hell we would see them in heaven. But they will be there. We will be there. With a song on our lips and our eyes full of faith. And we'll sing how amazing is grace.
Some drunk poet was singing of God and his mercies, quietly sipping his gin, painting a picture of words from a portrait of Jesus becoming again. And oh, sing, oh Lord, oh grace. And oh, sing, oh Lord, oh grace. And oh, sing, oh Lord, oh grace. Oh, sing, oh Lord, oh grace.
This is the kingdom of heaven right now. And in the kingdom of heaven, there is no sickness. So if you say, yes, I want to receive that healing, then you shall be healed.
Yeah.
We both have health issues. I do struggle with that concept of if you want to be healed, you shall be healed. But I do think it is also a superpower for us to be risk takers, to do things that are really, really radical. And even like one of your favorite pieces, Freak Show, is such a radical way of looking at heaven. And I remember the first time I ever seen you perform it, like the room just froze. It just froze. And it's beautiful. And I do consider you a prophet, and not someone who's a fortune teller, but someone who sees. You see, and it does confront, and it is uncomfortable.
And Freak Show is, I think, a perfect example of like what we were talking about, that turning upside down of everything we are taught is right and good. And at the end of the day, no matter how justice oriented we say we are and how all about love and forgiveness we say we are, most people have limits. At some point, it's like, God, forgive people, forgive me, except for these type of people. If you've done this thing, you've gone too far. Mm-hmm. And I think part of the good news, part of the radical nature is there is nobody beyond redemption. Mm-hmm. If you are breathing, I don't care if you've committed rape, murder, statutory rape, pedophilia, nothing. Nobody is beyond redemption. And people don't like hearing that.
No, even when you said it, you said pedophilia, there's something inside of me that just like, really?
Totally.
But it's true. It's true.
It's absolutely true. And I think the reason why that is important, well, two things. Onto the story that went into Freak Show, it was a poem inspired by someone else, or excuse me, that poem was inspired by another person's poem. But before that, just conceptually though, the reason why we cannot write anyone off as just beyond redemption, oh, you are a monster, or you're too stupid to understand, you're just so ignorant, you'll never know the truth, is because the second you do that, then you also lose your protest. Because this is the thing. If someone is just a monster, if someone is just a beast, you're not mad at a lion for, destroying its prey, for ripping it to pieces. That's what a monster does, right? So if you dehumanize people who are dehumanizing you, you lose any appeal, right? If they're just too stupid, if they're just too dumb and too ignorant to understand, then you lose the appeal. I will forever appeal. If Hitler was still alive today, I would not say he's beyond redemption. I would appeal to the humanity in him. I would appeal to the image of God present in every single human being. That is all we got. And if we can't appeal to that, if we write them off, I say, we can't appeal to that. They're just a monster. And therefore, they are totally justified in acting in just being completely evil. And it's not even evil anymore. It's just who they are.
That goes back to the enslavement of Black people.
Yeah.
Like they don't appeal to the fact that they are created beings holding the breath of God.
But the poem that inspired Freak Show, though, it's this poet named Anis Mojgani. And he has this poem called Shake the Dust. And in the very beginning of the poem, it's a really feel-good poem. It's basically, it's dedicated to anyone who for any reason feels like a social outcast. You know, so at first he's talking about, and I'm just like paraphrasing here, but you know, like to the kid in the wheelchair, or, you know, the plus size girl who gets teased for her weight, shake the dust, shake the dust. And everyone's like, yeah, shake the dust. Don't pay attention to the bullies and the meanies. Like, you're beautiful, blah, blah, blah. But then he gets to the middle of the poem and he says, to the celibate pedophile who keeps on struggling, shake the dust. And I remember the first time I heard that, I froze. And I was like, man, imagine for a moment if this was your reality, if you were an adult plagued with experiencing sexual attraction towards children, whether you've acted on it in the past or not, this is something that you experience. Every time you hear someone like you brought up in culture, in casual conversation with friends, on the news, in church, in a sermon, the only thing you hear is ill, gross, disgusting, menace to society, lock them up, they deserve to rot in jail, die and burn in hell. It is culturally acceptable, and I would even go so far as to say, seen as morally right to hate, to be thoroughly disgusted by even the very existence of someone who would even think about doing something like that to a child. That's your experience in our society. Who do you talk to? If you're trying to fight this thing, you talk to your best friend, you talk to your pastor, who do you talk to that you wouldn't be so terribly afraid would judge you and be so disgusted by you that they wouldn't even want to be around you anymore, right? And then this poet, Anis, comes on stage, and I thought it was so brilliant because, again, in one line of poetry, he takes a firm stance on the justice of the issue, but in the same breath extends so much grace. He says, to the celibate pedophile, if this is you, I need you, I expect you to be celibate for the good of all society, but to the celibate pedophile who keeps on struggling, you're fighting this thing. I cannot imagine how lonely you must feel. How difficult that must be. Thank you for fighting. Thank you for the fact that you continue to struggle. Shake the dust. Look at yourself in the mirror and say you are worthy. It is a good thing that you exist. You shouldn't just die and burn in hell or rot in jail. Your life is worth something. Thank you for fighting. Man, that makes me uncomfortable, but when I heard it, I knew it was 100% true. And again, not just the moral high road, but I try to put myself in the shoes of someone like that, and I think, what would be the more compelling thing to try to encourage me to continue to fight this thing in me? Someone just telling me I'm gross, disgusting? No, that would just make me ashamed and make me go into hiding even more. Someone telling me, I acknowledge your struggle and I appreciate your willingness to struggle. Be encouraged. We see you. We love you. Shake the dust and keep going, brother. That would be way more effective in encouraging me to continue to fight and maybe even reaching out and getting help, because it would remind me maybe there are humans in this world that wouldn't judge me, you know? So I'm like, again, not just the moral high road, but the actually more effective approach to fight evil with, in this case, literally poetry. His poem, that poem is what inspired Freak Show.
Yeah, it was just so powerful. And even in that example of pedophilia, I'm like, I don't want to keep talking about pedophilia, but it does make me feel so uncomfortable. And that is the thing, is like, there is no one beyond redemption. And I think about Judas too. Like, if he didn't kill himself, Jesus would have forgave him.
And I would say Jesus did forgive him.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, that was Judas struggling with his inability to forgive himself.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? That was him and his own shame, and not being able to receive the love that he got.
Right.
You know? I think there's a whole nother thing from it, like a part of it. Like, you can be forgiven all you want. If you don't know how to receive that, you're going to have some issues, you know? But I'm like, Jesus knew from the beginning, and he was still washing Judas's feet and rolling with him. It didn't surprise. He knew what was going to happen. He still treated him with love, you know?
Yeah. It's so funny, the things that I grew up hearing in church and like doubting Thomas. And now that I'm older, I'm like, you can call me Elizabeth Lorraine Thomas Weiss. Like, just because I get it. I understand.
Logical Thomas.
Yeah.
We seen the dude die, okay?
We saw you die a horrific death.
Yeah.
In my face, carried your body, buried you. Yes, I've seen other things happen, but you are the one who did all these things. Like, what? And I just need to see.
Yeah.
And I feel like there have been a lot of moments in the last 3 months. I mean, 2020, there's so much that has happened this year. But even in the last 3 months.
You believe it's just June? We have enough. It's halfway through. There's enough time for everything that's happened up until here to happen again.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just saying. And you know, the cherry on top's finna be when Trump gets reelected. Oh my goodness, it's gonna be.
You know what? Yeah. This is where it all ends. We're done. We're calling this. This is the end.
It's amazing to me when I think about it. I'm not excited about it. It's just astonishing. I'm like, wow.
Yeah, there are a lot of moments where I'm like, man, I wonder what Micah's thinking. I feel like Micah was born for this episode in humanity.
Right.
There's just so many things that have happened in the last 6 months, and we have 6 more months to go, and no one knows what's happening. And I'm like, God, I've laid all the tools of faith that I've carried with me since I was 15, even in the most deepest, darkest times of my life. I have continued to press into you, but I don't know how to pray for this. There's a part of me that's like, the pandemic feels like a worldwide flood, and I can't even pray that it ends because we have just been so awful to one another. I just don't want to suffer. Don't let me die, Lord, like that.
On a serious note, I know I was joking a little bit, but I find it kind of funny how literally every year since 2016, towards the end of the year, everyone's like, oh my gosh, worst year ever. Can't wait for the new year. Fresh start. 2018
was pretty bad.
Yeah, exactly. 2018, it can go. 2019 is going to be so much better. Then by then 2019 sucks. Can't wait for 2020. And again, it's just like, man, like, it's an illusion. Time is just, we working off some calendar that some, Greeks or whatever invented. That has nothing to do, like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the date is. And I understand things feel more overwhelming right now. But fact of the matter is, with 7 billion people on planet Earth, with all the conflicts happening all around the world, at any given point, somebody's world is ending. Somebody's father or lover or best friend is dying of cancer. Somebody's nation is in a civil war. Someone's whole family just got wiped out, for senseless tragedy. At any given point in human history, there are things to lament and there are things to celebrate. There are beautiful and awful things happening It's not seasonal. I know in your own life or maybe your own national context, it can feel like ebbs and flows. But at every single moment, there's something to celebrate and there's something to mourn. These are perpetual realities. And sometimes we're just, more aware of that. But nothing is ever all good or all bad. And so your perspective is more important than what's actually happening in your life. Because as we know, and as we even mentioned earlier, there are people who live the good life by almost everyone's estimation, and they hate their life, and they're depressed, and they hate themselves, and nothing makes them happy, and they are constantly mourning, even though they have no material needs, right? Even though everyone they love is healthy and present, and they hate their lives. Again, I think it is not just a spiritual, but also a mental battle, a perspective shift. I know this is kind of like unrelated to justice issues, but back to kind of where we started about creativity, I listened to this podcast. It's called Broken Record by Rick Rubin, who's a famous producer. And he was interviewing Andre 3000. And Andre 3000 is, if you're not familiar with hip hop, he is one half of probably the most famous rap duo in history, Outkast. And Outkast made amazing music together. And then they kind of stopped touring. And the other half of Outkast, Big Boy, went on to have a pretty impressive solo career, dropped several albums. And so Rick Rubin is asking Andre, hey, you made a lot of music with Outkast, but since y'all stopped touring as a duo, you have never come out with a solo record. He goes, he's featured on people's stuff here and there, but Rick says, should we be anticipating an Andre 3000 solo record? People have argued that Andre is one of the best rappers ever. Some say he's the GOAT. The only reason people don't give him the title is because he's never had a solo record. And Andre's response was, I'm just not confident enough. Mm-hmm. And I'm up here like, wait, what? Because I know artists who we're up here like, oh, well, we're not making a lot of money, or we feel like we're not that good. We need to get better at our craft. And I'm like, Andre has made all the money, has won the awards, has the acclaim. And what it reminded me was your confidence has nothing to do with your talent or your success. It is a mental and a spiritual struggle. And in that same podcast, he was talking about his struggle with mental health. And your mind always creates a reason, even if there is no good reason, to lack confidence with your art or to be depressed or this, that, and the other. And for him, it was actually his success that created the insecurity. He was talking about, we were so successful as outcasts that I'm afraid that if I make something, it won't live up to the reputation I created for myself. Mm-hmm. So it's like, now, is that really the root of it? Maybe, but he was going to find a reason. He is insecure, and he admits this. I'm not like putting this on him. He's like, I'm insecure. I don't think the music I make is ever good enough, which is why I haven't put any out. And it just amazed me. And another thing he said that really amazed me was he was talking about how he does his laundry at the laundromat. Mm-hmm. This dude couldn't have maids who press and fold things for him. But he says, I like going to the laundromat because it just makes me feel human again. Yeah. Just sitting, waiting for my clothes to dry with, laundromats are usually associated with lower income folk who don't have the means, All that to say is, it's just really interesting because you're like, Andre, why are you insecure? You're so talented. You're so successful. Why are you struggling so much? And it's like, he has to tend to his mental and his spiritual health. Your circumstances have very little to do with whether or not you're happy, whether or not you're confident or satisfied with life. Mm-hmm. It really doesn't. It has so little to do with it.
Yeah. And that leads me to how we met, because you wanted to make a blues record.
So,
do you want to tell people about how we met?
Oh, totally. So I was familiar with Liz's work because I used to live in Oregon for a couple years, and she was in the Portland
Bend?
area. Yeah, I lived in Bend, and so I had, being an artist in the Northwest, I had a lot of artist friends, and we had friends in common, but we had never met. I didn't know her apart from her music, but all the people I knew who knew her were like, "Oh my gosh, she's super dope." And then I listened to her record, and I was like, "Yo, girl, she can sing, right?" And at the time, I was mainly just doing hip hop and spoken word poetry. But fast forward a couple years after like being introduced to her music, I decided to do a blues record, and I wrote a couple tracks that were duets, and they called for a powerful bluesy female voice. And I remember I don't know if I told you this part, but I was sick. Again, I have ulcerative colitis, and I was having a really bad flare. So I was hospitalized at the time, and I was sitting around just doing nothing. But I had my computer, my laptop with me, and I was just like, I want to do something. I can't do anything. And I was thinking about my record that I was in the middle of working on. I was like, man, that Liz Vice lady, I was like, she would just be the perfect voice for this record, right? So I was like, you know what? Let me just see. And so I went to her website, and at the time, I don't know what it looks like now, but it just seemed like the process to which, like, contacting her through the website, it seemed like there was a bunch of layers in between. I'm like, I don't even know if she's going to read this. I was like, I want to try to go straight to the source. So then I went to social media and went on Instagram and Facebook, and on Facebook it said she was very responsive to messages on her artist page. So I was like, cool, let me try here. So I'm in the hospital, and I just write this really ridiculously long message explaining who I was and why I appreciated her work, and how I usually don't collaborate with artists I don't know. However, our mutual friends speak so highly of your character, and that's important to me, not just your talent, and blah, 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 blah. And so I'm like trying to sound super professional, and I send you this message, and I kid you not, like 2 minutes later, you were like, awesome, yeah, totally, let's do it. I was like, what? I was like, what? But the reason why she was so enthusiastic was I didn't know, because I thought she didn't know I existed. But here, I'll let you take it from there with how you came upon my work originally.
Oh, yeah. My roommate, she gave me your CD. What? The one, it's like sepia tone. And
The Man Without a Name.
I listen to it all the time. The Ex Nihilo portion, it was just like, it was like a meditation, and I would just listen to that over and over and over. And I said, yes, I didn't know who you were. You flew me to Long Beach, California. I spent the night at some friend's house that you had connections to, and you told me you didn't sing, but you were going to make a record in which you were singing. And I'm like, I don't even know if this is going to be good. And it's such a good record.
You're going off on the rage, throwing your good in my face, screaming that I don't remember all your patience and grace. Yeah, I made some mistakes, but it's easy to see I'm not the one forgetting how you used to love me. All that good you was doing, all them gifts that you gave, didn't know that they was credit you would try to exchange. Didn't know that they were weapons you would use for my shame. Didn't bother keeping score, cause it wasn't a game. Now love keeps no record of right. If you think I owe you something, this whole thing is a lie. We were supposed to be forever, why you keep your receipts? I don't care how much it cost you, now I know it was cheap. Just how many thank yous do you think you deserve? Your generosity seems a little perverse. If love is what you're giving, don't be holding it tight. And don't you have that left hand keeping track of the right? Is this what you wanted? Your praise in a song? Is this what you wanted? A round of applause. Here goes your attention, there goes your reward. Now the whole world knows that your love is a fraud.
Didn't you take like vocal lessons?
I did. So this is my thing. Like, I don't think that you grow in your comfort zone, right? I like challenging myself creatively, and I'm a creative writer, but vocally before the blues record, I never sang any. I mean, I would sing around the house and stuff, but I never sang seriously. I was a rapper and a poet. But I got into listening to a lot of blues, and one thing I noticed about blues vocalists was that none of them had, for the most part, even the most famous blues vocalists, they didn't have finesse voices like, Usher or, Michael Jackson. It wasn't like, ooh, they could sing good in that type of polished way. It was really their ability to capture emotion that was compelling. You heard the pain of them losing a woman or them going broke, and you could hear it. And it was often these slightly off-key, scratchy vocals, and you listen, you're like, yeah, but that's perfect. The voice sounds like the emotion they're trying to portray. And from being a spoken word performance poet, I knew I was good at channeling the right emotions. And so I just thought to myself, if I just get a little bit of instruction on how to use my instrument of my voice to sing, then I think I can pull this off. And so that's what I did. I signed up for singing lessons, and I was comforted by the fact that it was a genre that didn't require a lot of smooth finesse. But also the other thing that drew me to blues was not just the sound of it. Even though I didn't grow up listening to blues, I grew up listening to like mainly gospel music and hip hop. The vocabulary, the stories being told as a Black American, it was very familiar to me. It just sounded like I was listening to my aunties and uncles tell stories, or my grandma, like my grandma's from Prentiss, Mississippi, from the accents in which they sang to the vocabulary they used, everything about it felt like home. And it was so strange to feel so at home in a genre that I really just started listening to. And be like, but this genre understands me. And I'm like, it makes sense. It came from my ancestors. So that was the other thing that drew me to blues. But it was very much so an experiment. But I had no intention about like pivoting my career to become a blues musician. It was like, I just want to do this blues experiment. And I'm so glad I did. And I've done that several times with my creative offerings. For me, poetry was an experiment. I was rapping for 2 years before I got invited to an open mic and saw spoken word live for the first time. So I engaged in this blues experiment, but I was so happy I did, because making a blues record was a total different experience than making a hip hop record or a spoken word record, because a lot of the music I was making, some hip hop definitely incorporates live instruments and stuff, but mine mostly didn't. I was working with beat makers who use programs and computers and plugins and things. But with the blues record, I had to reach out to different type of producers, different type of musicians, both who like played instruments and vocal musicians like Liz, to where it expanded my network of creatives, which was really cool. It helped me realize that I could do things I didn't think I could do. And then also it introduced me to the idea of writing with and for other people, because I wrote the songs not with Liz in mind at first, but just with a female vocalist in mind. But then when Liz came on, she did a great job, and then we started talking, and I ended up writing a handful of songs for Liz and with Liz, collaborating also the ideas that she had, and I helped her shape those songs. And so it was, for me, stepping outside of my comfort zone, it just expanded the creative possibilities. And so now, even going back to hip hop, for example, a lot of the hooks, the choruses on my songs, I'll sing now because I feel more comfortable singing. And I wouldn't really have done that before. And even right now, I'm working on another experimental project with my homegirl Lucy, who's an amazing singer-songwriter. But we're singing folk songs. And it's like really gentle sounding folk music that doesn't sound like blues and doesn't sound like hip hop, and it doesn't sound like spoken word. It's just something different. But even that, again, it's helping me realize by stepping outside of my comfort zone, now I am trying to lean into the more gentle finesse way of singing pretty. Blues isn't necessarily pretty. This folk music I'm doing with Lucy is very pretty. It's very gentle, and it's growing me. So yeah, I'm just kind of like, if I get the idea, I'll try it, because to me it's not just about making good art. It's about being true to myself. It's about growing in the process of creating, and it's a beautiful thing. So I really don't care. Like I genuinely, like, when I put out that blues record, I was not sweating that I would rise in the blues charts. I was just very glad that I challenged myself, and I think the music is dope. But even if it wasn't dope, it grew me. Yeah.
I mean, Happy As Can Be is playing in my head, especially for when we went in the garage and we're like stumping and clapping in the tambourine and we're just around this mic, and Scarf was there and playing, and it was just like seeing the community around you and how lovely it, even being able to go to your anti-Valentine's Day party. I want to talk about a project that you have that's going to be releasing soon, your own book of poetry.
Yes.
How does that feel, and how did that come about?
Yeah, I'm super excited about it. It keeps getting delayed for a bunch of reasons, but it definitely will be out this year, and likely by the end of the summer, probably by the end of August at the latest. But so I've been writing poetry for 10 years, but a very specific type of poetry. If you're not as familiar with spoken word, it's poetry written to be performed, not just read off of a page. So there's a very theatrical element to it. I have done albums of that, but I never like printed it in books, because essentially the way I looked at it, like, although some spoken word poetry reads well, a lot of it doesn't, because it's like the difference between writing a novel and writing a script for a play or a movie, right? If you write a novel, you expect your audience to read it off the paper. But if you're telling that same story with a play in mind or film in mind, even if it's the same story, you're going to tell it different. And so it changes the writing. And although I had been writing poetry, it had been spoken word poetry. So I never really felt comfortable printing my work on the page, because it just didn't seem the same. And I also, like, there are elements to poetry on the page that I had never considered before. I never thought about how my poetry looked when you looked at the poem. You would go to my documents that I would write them in, and they just look like essays. But now when you open a book of poetry, the first thing, before you read a single word, it looks a certain way. You can communicate before people even read it. It can look like chaos on the page. It can look like very precise, ordered, all like 4 stanzas of 6 lines each. It could be left a line, right a line, centered. All of these things, before you even start reading, evoke a certain response. And so I hadn't even considered that. And so people had asked me for years, when are you going to do a book? When are you going to do a book? When are you going to do a book? And I was like, never. I'm like, no, I'm a spoken word poet. Yes, I'm a poet, but not that type of poet. But then actually, I met a few poets that I really respect who both did spoken word and page poetry. And they really encouraged me to do a book. And so I said, all right, I'll try. And my idea was, could I basically take my spoken word poems and maybe change the format a bit? Maybe just have an alternative version. I would make them a little shorter, because spoken word poems, they're like song length often, 3 to 5 minutes. But usually when you're reading a book of poetry, it'll fit on 1 or 2 pages, and you're done reading a poem in maybe 30 seconds, right? So I was trying to like change my spoken word poems and format them for the page, and most of them were just not working. So I decided instead, I'm like, you know what? No, I'm going to generate brand new material that was intended for the page in the first place. I took just a handful of poems that I already had that did work on the page. But by and large, for the most part, in the year 2018, I did a discipline where I wrote a poem a day the entire year. And
Of course
that,
you would.
so that was because I needed you need probably between 40 and 60 poems for a decent book of poetry, right? So that was my aim. I was trying to get between 40 and 60 poems. So I thought, hey, if I write 365 of them, only a small portion of them need to be good, and I'll have my book. So I took all of 2018 and I wrote with the page in mind, not with spoken word in mind. And then I took all of 2019 and I was editing and picking which poems to put in the book and editing them, formatting them for the page. And then now it's 2020. It's time to release it. And so the first half of this year has been kind of spent, formatting the book and getting the artwork together and stuff. And so I'm super excited about it. I think it's going to give people, if you are familiar with my work, it's going to give you a glimpse to sides of me that you may not have seen before. Mainly because I don't necessarily try. I try to be honest, and I try to create work about everything. But a lot of the events that I get invited to are justice oriented, and that was not on purpose. When I started writing, I wasn't like, I'm going to write about justice issues. I'm just Black in America, so I started writing about my experiences, and it just happened that way. However, I think about everything. But so many of my more popular pieces, and so often the events that I get invited to are, discussions on race and justice and blah, blah, blah. So people get this idea that I'm just like this super serious person who's just always talking about, racial injustice or theology or philosophy, and like I'm like mad deep all the time. And that is not me at all. Like, anyone who knows me knows I'm a fool. I like to joke. I'm a hopeless romantic. I love stories. I love them. I am chronically single, and I've had terrible luck.
That was on the list of what not to ask you, so I was not gonna bring that up.
Yeah. But the thing is, I think love stories are cool. You know what I'm saying? I like chick flicks. I love hearing like couples. Every time I meet a couple, I'm like, so how'd you meet? Who liked who first? Who asked who out? All this stuff. And that's a part of me that's not really as present in my albums and in my performances. A time like this was my latest full-length album, and it was all about addressing, like racial issues. And, Trump had got elected, and I had a lot on my heart, and it was just like, bah, 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 bah. And there's like maybe one or two songs about other things, but for the most part, I'm like, yeah, let's take down capitalism, racism, imperialism, all the isms. But the book, though, there's definitely that, because that's a big part of who I am. But the whole middle section is about relationships of all kinds, not just romance. It's about friendship. It's about my relationship with my parents, all types of relationships. People I've had a crush on but never dated, people I was in relationships with, broken hearts, getting over exes, all of those things. And then the third section is about like faith and the way my faith has grown and developed over the years, and wrestling with doubt and all these things. So it's like these three distinct sections, all under the theme of dreams. So the book is called Here Comes This Dreamer, but the first section is called Nightmares, the second section is called Daydreams, and the third section is called Prophecies. And I feel like more than any work of art that I've ever released in any genre, this book will give you the most holistic picture of who I am as a person. So I'm super excited for people to see that.
I'm so excited for you.
Yeah.
So how can people support you?
For sure. Great question. First of all, I produce a lot. I don't feel like it because I'm not rushing myself.
You don't?
No.
You have so much. You're like, yeah, I'm going to make another record. What? It takes me like 4 or 5 years to finally decide to make another record.
Listen, the lockdown, quarantine, I have nothing to do. I'm locked in the house all day. All I've been doing, I've written like friggin' 3 records worth of new songs. Because every day I'm just sitting around reading and writing.
And your records aren't like, oh, here's a record of 8 songs. It'll be like one record is 20 songs.
Oh, literally, I have 20 songs for my next record. And that's sure the good ones. Like, that's 20 after I cut a lot of songs. So my last record was 16 songs. This one's finna be 20. I mean, maybe not. I can't really afford 20. Well, that goes to your question about support. So what I was saying is, I have a book coming out. I also recorded an audio book with music. So the whole book, like probably a month after we released the book, it'll be me reading all those poems, and I hooked up with one of my homies who's a producer here, and he put some really nice, like, gentle, complimentary music. So I have a book, an audio book, a folk EP with my homegirl Lucy, and I'm working on a new hip-hop record. So those are my 4 projects right now. All that to say is they cost a lot to create and promote. So if you dig the work and you want to help support, the best way to do that is my Patreon page. If you're not familiar with Patreon, you sign up to support people monthly. Once you sign up, you don't have to think about it. It just automatically comes out of whatever account you sign it up with. But the cool thing about it is it's a win-win for artists and supporters, because at whatever level you give, like, you can give $5 a month, $10 a month, but there's different rewards. And so I encourage people on the $10 a month level, you get some really cool perks, because basically you get early edition of everything I'm working on. Like the audiobook that I'm working on, I already put a track up there from the audiobook, and so you can listen to that. My book is not out, but my entire manuscript is available. You can read the whole thing if you give $10 a month. So you can read the book, you'll be excited about it, and then see behind the scenes on some of my process. For the $5 level, I do a monthly playlist of, like, music and poetry that inspires me. So and I try to find artists that are kind of like me, like not that well known, but are, making good work. And so you'll discover a lot of new poets and musicians that are talking about real stuff. So yeah, the $5 level is playlist, the $10 level is playlist and behind the scenes stuff. And then it goes more and more as you get up. So I'm always open to one-time donations, Venmo, PayPal. But if you want to, like, more support me on a regular basis, it's just Micah Bournes, or patreon.com/Micah Bournes. So that's the best way. Follow me on Instagram.
Need to sign up.
Follow me on Instagram and stuff too, because I'm constantly posting not just the new art, but I post a lot of rants on Instagram. Educational rants. Yes.
They might even challenge friendships.
Yes. Resources.
One of your posts.
Yeah. Well, anyway, a lot of interesting stuff. And I also try to point you to other artists that are doing dope stuff. And I love IG. That's my social media of choice. But I am on Facebook as well and Twitter. But I don't ever use Twitter. But yeah, follow me. I'm going to be dropping a couple singles soon. I kind of... they weren't supposed to be ready, but with everything happening, I fast-tracked them. So I got two singles that'll be coming out about everything going on within the next month for sure. And those are off the hip-hop album. So I'm already working on everything. But, yeah, I need all the help I can get to finish it up.
Yeah, I think it's a worthy cause for sure.
And what about you, young lady? What are you working on these days?
Dude, I don't even know. Sometimes the days go by and I'm like, it's already what? 7 o'clock? Well, I guess I'll cook dinner.
Yo, dinner, that's an art, yo.
I have some songs. I've been recording a lot and singing on a lot of projects, but I feel like I have to be... Someone once told me that inspiration is for amateurs. And that, like, really shook me. And then I put more pressure on myself to try to create. Oh, I mean, you love that.
Bad, but I agree with the sentiment.
And so that just feels very paralyzing. So, like, now I'm going to go back and listen to Broken Record with Andre 3000, because I totally understand that feeling of being paralyzed, especially because my first record is so popular. And yeah, my second record did pretty well too. But, like, it's like, what do I have to say that hasn't been said? Or how do I get what's in my head into paper? And do I even want to do this anymore since touring is over for a while? And I don't want to go back to what I was doing before this pandemic. I was burnt out. Like, I was so exhausted. I'm a very slow mover. And I think and analyze everything. If people want to know, I'm a 6 on the Enneagram. So security and safety is like my thing, and fear is my sin. And I don't even know, sometimes I can't even pinpoint what my fear is. It might not be that I don't think I'm good enough. It might be that I might not be able to sustain something that I start, right? Like I might run out of steam. I might lose my inspiration. And so it's like, then why move forward in the beginning, like at all? And we have these conversations all the time where I'm like, yeah, I'm done with music. I can't do this anymore. Oh yeah, I just released a single, but that's it.
She be quitting music every 2 weeks. I'm like, yeah, whatever. Can I launch into another rant? Do we got time for that? Because I have to speak to what you said. Inspiration is for amateurs. Yes, and amen. And another thing you said, what can I say that hasn't been said before? So if I remember that, just in case I forget. But I want to address that too. But the first part, inspiration is for amateurs. I agree, because I think a lot of people see creativity as this magical force that just comes upon you and just boom, now you're inspired and you don't have to try. It just flows out of you easily. I can't say I've never had that experience. I have. But if you depend primarily on this possession of inspiration, then you'll maybe create once or twice a year for some people. For some people, it comes very frequently. But for most artists I know, it doesn't come very frequently. I think that discipline, people see it as almost the opposite, of good art. Like, no, the best stuff comes when you just feel it and let it flow. I disagree. I don't think discipline is the opposite of inspiration, but I think they actually enhance each other. So when you make a discipline of creating, I put it like this. If you create, even when you don't feel inspired, you're keeping yourself sharp. So then, when the inspiration comes, you capitalize off of it better. Because let's say I don't feel inspired for 6 months, so I just don't write anything for 6 months. And then I have a great idea and I feel inspired. Well, I'm rusty. I've been out of practice for 6 months. But if for 6 months I discipline myself to show up and to put ideas on paper, even if I don't like anything I create, I'm still exercising that muscle of writing. I'm still getting some ideas out. And some of them might not be amazing, but some of them might be good. And then when the inspiration comes, I'm still in shape. Even though I haven't created anything that I would call a win, I'm not out of practice. My vocabulary, my creativity, me just making space in my life for or time to create is already there because I've stayed in it. So now I'm like, okay, cool. Now I'm capitalizing off of this inspiration. And I just think a lot of people, I have a friend who said there's no such thing as writer's block. He goes, yeah. Writer's block is just you judging your work, but you can always write something. You can always put thoughts on paper, even if it's just stream of consciousness, right? And I'm talking from a person who's primarily a writer, but I think this applies to any art form. People say you shouldn't force it, and I disagree. Like I do understand there are some times where you just need a break, but you should force it. You should discipline yourself to get your ideas out, because there's so many times where there are failed pieces that helped me shape the ones that actually worked. Okay, I wrote this song, and the song as a whole and the melody sucked, but the third verse, I finally understand what I was trying to say now. So then the next song I write is the right one. You know what I mean? Or I'll take ideas from that third verse or just even a line and incorporate it into something else, etc. But yeah, I always tell this story, and I know I've told you this before, Liz, but this is more for the listeners. A book that really inspired me was called Art and Fear.
I have that book.
It's amazing, amazing, amazing. But one of the stories in the book, they say that there is a ceramics teacher who divided their class down the middle in the beginning of the semester. And they said half of you will be graded on quality and the other half will be graded on quantity. So it says the quality side of the classroom, you only have to make one ceramic pot the whole semester, but it has to be nearly perfect if you want an A. And then it says the quantity side, it doesn't matter how good or bad your pots are, but you have to make 50 pounds of pots for an A, 40 pounds for a B, and so on. So it goes fast forward to the end of the semester. It said all of the best pots came from the quantity side, not the quality side. Why? Because they took the pressure of perfection off of themselves and they just allowed themselves to create. And you know what? Their first 10, 15, 20 pounds of pots were awful, but they didn't care because that wasn't the point. It was to make a lot. And in the process of making a lot of pots, by the time they hit 30 pounds, stuff was looking better, 40 pounds. By the time they got to 50 pounds of pots, they were a better pot maker, right? And so then it said, while the quality side sat around theorizing about perfection and had nothing more to show for themselves than grandiose ideas and a pile of dead clay. And when I read that story, I'm like, this is it. That used to be me. I would sit down and write. I would write 1 or 2 lines of a poem and be like, oh, this is trash. I delete it. It doesn't even exist yet. How do I know it's trash? I would like paralyze myself by wanting to make something good instead of just exercising my creativity and allowing it to come without judging it. And so it's not that I say quantity over quality, but I think quality comes by quantity. The more you make, the better you become, period. And so why would you sit around and wait for inspiration? See what happens when you have to really press it out. And surprisingly, some of my best work was not the stuff that came one time in a huge flow. Freak Show, I wrote that poem over a 3-year period because I knew what I wanted to say, but I didn't have the words quite yet. It was a niece's poem, which I mentioned, and it was also a song that inspired me, which is actually part of the recording. That couple singing, Kevin and Anya, I heard them sing that song at a coffee shop in Denver. Like, at this point, it was like 6 years ago. But I love that song so much, and I love the message of the song. It says, some drunk poet was singing of God and his mercy. And the idea of just this, again, cultural outcast, this drunk person, but singing of the mercy of God struck me. And I was like, there's something there. I want to write about that. And originally, the poem wasn't called Freak Show. It was called After the Flood, because it made me think of Noah, who was this righteous man, quote unquote. And the first thing he did after he got out the boat was get drunk and strip down naked, And it was like, this is the one guy that God chose was to say it. It was like, and it just made me think, some drunk poet was singing of God and his mercy. And I was like, yo, that's powerful. And then I heard Anissa's poem and those two things together. But I had already started writing elements of the poem before I heard Anissa's poem. And it was like, it didn't come natural. The idea came, but it wasn't there. I wasn't inspired enough, right? And people love that poem. But then I have other poems that, like Normal Hair, which is another really popular poem of mine. I wrote that poem in like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Like, it was just like, I got the idea. It was like, there it goes.
Yeah.
That's
how Save Me was. The song Save Me literally took like 10 to 15 minutes. Then the rest of the songs that followed took 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. Exactly.
And I had to meet you.
But that's the point. And both of those are good. It's good that you write songs when you just feel inspired. And it's also good when you have to slowly churn it out and be disciplined with your creativity. So, yeah, I'm like, that's why when you said, inspiration is for amateurs. Yeah, absolutely. People who do this pro, they understand you cannot sit around and wait for inspiration. You ain't gonna make nothing.
Before I left for college, my mom told me, study hard.
Read your Bible.
Don't get pregnant.
Don't bring home no white girl.
What?
She was joking.
Yeah, of course she was joking.
It's not like mom's is racist or nothing.
Before I left for college, my dad told me, don't fall in love with anyone you're ashamed to introduce to your parents. I remember my dad sinking into the couch to watch local news. He said, Black Lives Matter is a terrorist organization.
What?
He said he was joking.
Was he joking?
Don't fall in love with anyone you're ashamed to introduce to your parents.
The freedom to fall in love with whoever I fall in love with would be nice. But every time I'm attracted to a light-skinned woman, I have to check my self-hatred. Would I fall for a darker version of her too? Light complexion is not a virtue, should not be a plus.
Every time I'm attracted to a man with dark skin, I have to check my self-hatred. Do I have a fetish? Because I do want to touch his hair. My skin feels like a ghost under the sheets my ancestors wore.
Then one of my black homies said, bruh, if you keep talking all this pro-black stuff and marry a white girl, you lose all credibility.
Then one of my white friends said, girl, you could never love a black man while your understanding of blackness is just a hypothesis. And I knew they were wrong. And I knew they were right.
But love is a hill worth dying on. And if I date a white woman, she needs to understand I will never lecture black women for feeling abandoned, for hoping someone outside of themselves would love them, for expecting those someones to be the sons they gave life. And if my white girlfriend can't tell the difference between my heartbroken mother and her racist father, she was never gonna last anyway. She was bound to leave when she realized my penis wasn't any bigger and her fantasies were just that. If you wanna date black, don't expect applause.
But love is a hill worth dying on. I know an interracial relationship is not going to cure racism, not even internally. I'm scared that when I'm screaming, black is beautiful, I'm really just screaming, I'm not racist, just so everyone knows. I'm not racist, I'm not racist. But what if I am? What if I don't say the right thing? What if I actually say the wrong thing? Because it's tradition to say I don't. But I do see color, and I'm trying to see it better. If I fall in love with a black guy, I hope he understands I'm trying. Because it's love that makes me want to understand our differences, not erase them. But I forgot this isn't a love poem.
This isn't a love poem. This is all hypothetical. Love is a hill worth dying on, but there's a gap between theory and practice.
I might chicken out.
I might accidentally on purpose stop holding your hand in a room full of blackness.
I might not introduce you to my parents. Not now, not yet. I might let racism and its effects keep me from loving you right, but I can never be ashamed of you. I'll be ashamed of myself.
Just spent more than an hour of your day listening to this conversation, and for that we're grateful. We'd love to continue the conversation by social media, so you can contact us at Bob Crawford Bass, at RevBrez, or through the show's social media at RTN Theology. We'd love to hear the ways that you're experiencing these conversations, the ways that you're sharing them and sparking new conversations, the ways that you're building community, and any ideas you might have for future guests or topics. If you enjoyed part 2 of this conversation, you might enjoy some of our older episodes like RTN Theology 12 on community building conversation and corner to corner. We talked with C. Christopher Smith of the Englewood Review and the author of How the Body of Christ Talks, and also Will Acuff of Corner to Corner in East Nashville, Tennessee. You also might appreciate Amy Peterson's conversation in episode 20 on her book, Where Goodness Still Grows, Reclaiming Virtue in an Age of Hypocrisy, or our time with Kelly Nikondeha about the women of Exodus in episode 24. We'll link to all these in the show notes. We hope you enjoy them, pass them on, follow, read, buy, support in any way possible. As always, RTN Theology is edited by the wonderful Gary Fletcher, hosted and produced by Bob Crawford and Chris Breslin. Special music for this 2-part episode comes from Micah Bournes' records No Ugly Babies and A Time Like This. You can find those at his Bandcamp or wherever you stream or buy music. Also, check out his website, micahbournes.com, and that's Micah, BOURNES.com. There's so much amazing spoken word poetry on there. You will fall down a deep, deep rabbit hole that is very worth your time.
Our intro music is A.A. Gray and 7 Foot Dilly, The Old Arcs A-Movin', and we love to end our show with David Childers' Jesus Said. Please remember to rate us on iTunes and write a review, subscribe to our podcast, and please, please, please share this episode with a friend. Until next time, take care.